Good morning. Happy Friday. Someday, maybe if I keep on doing all these things, which, what am I even saying? Someday I'll come on the same days at the same time, and that'll be great. Not there yet, though. Happy Friday. It has been quite a week. We are actually going to New York this afternoon, evening, and so I've got a lot to do today, but I am trying to achieve some of my goals, and that means just making time and doing a video when you have 20 minutes to do a video. So conveniently, today's chapter episode is quite short, but I wanted to include it. It is its own chapter because it's important. So today we are at chapter 23. It's called The Reset. Chapter 22, as you know, was the vulnerability. So watch the vulnerability, and this one will make a little more sense. But this could be a standalone chapter, actually. So let's get into it. So as I began letting myself be truly seen, which is, the power of vulnerability, my life began to change in fascinating ways, like really, truly fascinating ways. I continued to meet with Dr. Kaufman regularly, and he just changed my life. I was out of college, at this point, but I continued to just pay him privately, and I met him up at his house, actually. So I'm a piano player, right? And I used to teach lessons in Spokane. And one time he was like, how about you trade some lessons for my wife, and I'll just do some sessions with you. It's like, okay. And so it was so funny. We didn't actually get very far in lessons with his wife because we were just talking the whole time. So I continued to meet with Dr. Kaufman, and it was, really, really helpful to my progress. But what continued to be helpful was remaining vulnerable with all kinds of people. I had just continued to learn more and more all the time that the power of vulnerability, it was just so real, like so true. And so I became more and more vulnerable as time went on. So I remember this one time at Red Robin, because I served there, when I had a run-in with this guest, this woman, who tried to kind of rile me up by telling me that she didn't approve of people with my lifestyle. So we all know what that means, right? And the old Darren would have said something that indicated that he didn't appreciate that, probably, but that would have been it. And then I probably would have gone into the back room and just started crying. Vulnerable Darren knew that if he simply used the words, I'm going to make myself vulnerable here, things can be different, right? So I remember that woman said that to me, and I took this long pause, and I stared at her right in the eye, and I just said, thank you for sharing. I'm going to make myself vulnerable as well. I really don't appreciate one-sided comments like yours, and I invite you to get to know me as simply Darren, and not just a fag. There's more to him than you think. And I walked away. Naturally, she asked for my manager, and I did not continue serving that table. But I had a great manager, and they were, I wasn't like in trouble or anything. My point is, I made myself vulnerable, right? And there was power in it immediately. She didn't get to steal that away from me. I drew on my courage, and I made myself vulnerable, and I retained my power. I am not some magical vulnerability warrior. Like, I still have my moments, right? So, but it was these types of situations that continued to open my life up, and in the very best authentic way. So I became very vulnerable with my at the time boyfriend, and I just got easier and easier. What did I have to lose? And I started sharing how I truly felt about some things. And there were always a lot of disagreements, and a lot of them continued to prove to be unsolvable, really. And so I decided that it was time for little Darren to finally be on his own. Without the power of vulnerability at work in my life, I don't think I would have ever had the courage to make that kind of a decision. So real estate was going pretty well. I had some closings going on. You know, at this point, I was in real estate for a little more than a year. Well, no, just under a year. And I had this one transaction. It was a pretty good sized transaction that was going to be closing. It was in the works. And by the way, it was what I thought was big at the time for Spokane. It was $400,000. Whoa! And I decided that as soon as it closed and I had that decent paycheck, I was going to take the plunge and move out on my own. So in May 2014, my big deal closed. Had some money. I had like $8,000. And I moved out. I signed a lease on my very own apartment, and it was this magical feeling. So moving out of my ex's house and into my own place was, I remember it being such a surreal experience because as you have, for those of you that have watched this story sort of from the beginning, you know that I hated being alone, right? And I was going to do anything I could to not be alone. That was my life goal, actually. There's a lot to that, remember, because I didn't want to spend time by myself. I didn't like myself. But things were a little different now. But up until then, my greatest fear had been being by myself, and I was tackling it. Here we go. But as scared as I felt, you know, that fear, it was also so invigorating and kind of endlessly exciting. And I'll never forget that. It was just like butterflies in my stomach as I moved into my own place. I didn't have any furniture or anything, so I had to like start from scratch. Thank goodness for Goodwill, right? So again, without the power of vulnerability, none of this was going to happen, right? So my extroverted nature had me meeting new people and all my neighbors and everyone at my new apartment complex very quickly. So I wasn't alone for too long. But the universe had decided to place me at this complex called the Breslin Apartments. I would love to figure out a way to sort of hashtag the Breslin and just get it out there to see who in the world has stories from the Breslin Apartments. They were built in like the 1920s, and so super old. And it had started as a hotel. It was a huge, beautiful old brick building, and I don't know when they had converted it into apartments, but it had been very early on. It wasn't like a 60s or 70s kind of thing, because these were old apartments. They were beautiful. They had all the hardwood floors, you know, the single pane windows and like 10-foot ceilings. It's cool, but it was also kind of cheap because, again, it was old. So there's a lot of students that lived there. It wasn't like low-income housing, nothing against low-income housing, but it wasn't like that. It was just a very eclectic, wonderful group of people. And the people that I met there are, to this day, they're still my friends, and I credit many of them for a lot of things that happen in my life. But one of the most powerful components of moving out on my own was the opportunity that I finally gave myself to start saying yes to myself. I started saying yes to myself. And it was just amazing. I'm still continuing to learn to say yes to myself. But when we learn to do that, our lives change all. It's incredible. So let's talk about that fear of being alone. And that whole spending time by yourself thing. Because it's important that you know that my fears didn't just go away overnight simply because I was learning about the power of vulnerability and I had moved out on my own. It still continues today, right? But in the past, when I had found myself alone, which I avoided at all costs, I would have done anything I could have to not spend time with myself. I'd play the piano, I'd watch TV, I'd cook, I'd clean. I would call as many people as I could until someone answered. I would FaceTime people. That's what I used to do. I just never wanted to be alone. But things started, they were just different. And I guess maybe some of this is that I was just simply growing up, but I was 23 years old at this point. And the weirdest thing started happening. I remember on like long days wanting nothing more than to just come home and be on my couch, maybe have a glass of wine by myself. This was revolutionary. I'd never wanted to do that ever before in my whole life. And I started to talk to myself and get to know myself, spend time with myself. I had never done this before. And I really began finding some resolution and closure to a lot of stuff that had been in my head, a lot of thoughts, a lot of ideas that at one time had seemed totally unsolvable, unresolvable in the past. Like I was never going to work through this stuff, right? And so I just placed it on the shelf. There it went. I started working through some of this stuff. It was crazy. And keep in mind that at this point, I'm 23 years old, right? It was 2014. At that point, it had been 2 years, 2 solid years since I had moved from Arkansas. And this was one of the very first times ever, if you can believe it, that I actually started reflecting on everything that had happened. Not only in those 2 years, but the 3.5 years in Arkansas, and then everything before then. This was legitimately one of the first times I'd ever stopped to take time and think on all this, kind of figure out, come to some conclusions. What happened? What the hell happened? How do you feel about it? Who are you now? What do you want? I'd never done this before, ever. And it's kind of crazy. But it was that year at the Breslin that I got to know myself. Who I was, what I wanted, where I was going. And it was a dramatic change from where, who, and how I had been in the past. It didn't happen overnight, but it did happen because I finally spent time with myself. And this chapter, this short little chapter, it's called The Reset, because spending time with myself combined with the power of vulnerability was truly the reset that I needed in my life in so many ways. And one of those ways, a big one, was actually the reset for what it meant to be gay. And I told you it's a short chapter. That's today's chapter. The next chapter, chapter 24, is called The New Gay. I think you'll enjoy that. Oh, goodness. Thank you guys for watching. What a fascinating journey this has been. I can't believe oh my gosh, it makes me want to cry. I can't believe I've done 23 episodes. Thank you again to my dear sweet friend Dana Adams. I'm going to tag her in this because this was all her idea. She said I should do this. And I can't believe it, but I have. So we only have 6 or 7 chapters left, and I think you'll like how this kind of ends, where I'm going with it. Enjoy your day wherever you are. Again, we're going to go to New York today. That's going to be kind of fun. There will not be a video next Monday. There'll only be one video next week because I'll be gone for the majority of it. So just keep that in mind. Love y'all. Thank you again. Let me know if you have questions, you want to see me, like whatever. I'm always here. So have a fabulous day, and I'll see you next week. Bye.